Welcome to the Kickstart podcast, where we highlight the stories of how professionals and Kickstarted navigate their successful careers. My name is Preston, and on this episode, we have the pleasure of hosting someone who has an impressive career in software engineering before he founded Insomnia Labs, a Web3 ad tech company that helps both brands and creators create long-term successful campaigns with their expertise and tools. Billy, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much, Preston. It's great to be here.
Likewise, happy to have you. So I think a great way to start, Billy, is for those that just don't know who you are, unfamiliar with your background, would you mind sharing a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been in the blockchain space for around 6 years now. How I first got into it was actually, took a year off school to work at a blockchain consulting company called Fractal Group. I met a lot of the cool people that I still work with today then, but back then I was kind of a newbie. So jumping into kind of Web3 was interesting for me because I was a software engineer background from then. And I think just having the insight of Web3 and understanding what it can actually do for people as individuals and organizations as companies or nonprofits, just really opened my eyes. And so from then, I really decided that, I wanted to do something inside Web3, like no matter what. And I had the opportunity to do that after I graduated college.
That's really cool. Would love to obviously talk more about Web3 and Insomnia Labs, but you mentioned that you really kind of started your career in software engineering. So what drew you to engineering? Is that something you've always wanted to do? How did you start on that career path?
Yeah, I think engineering, at least like computers in general, has always kind of drawn me. I think the idea that you could write code one time and have it be used by millions of people, I think was alluring. And that type of amplification, reusability, automation is just really awesome. I think if you think about the things that you could do, right, like social media being a great advent and an invention that really helped or could negatively impact people, but separate topic. But things that you could make that has wide reach and large impact. And I think writing code and learning how to do that was very rewarding because I wanted to build things that a lot of people could touch.
Did you self-teach yourself? Did you learn coding at university?
It was kind of a blend of both. I took a couple of classes in high school, and then I thought that it was interesting. And then I started picking it up as a major when I went to NYU. And I then most of kind of what I know today is more self-taught because I think in school they teach you a lot of the standards, like the foundational things that you would want to understand if it's more like interview based, like if I were going to go work at Google or whatnot. But if you are trying to do more kind of like startup-y things, you kind of need to know everything, right? Versus, work in a specific stack, work in a specific domain. I think the mindset there is more like you need to understand how systems are formed as a whole at a more macro scale. And that I learned outside of school. I think most of that I learned working for startups and working like under CTOs, interning at companies that were more up and coming. So I think a good kind of blend of both is probably needed for most software devs, especially if you have dreams of making your own company.
So how do you think about engineers in general that did not go to a proper four-year university with a comp sci degree, or maybe they're self-taught, unconventional, maybe boot camps? Do you think they can kind of get to where someone like yourself, they can close that gap? Or do you think inherently there will always be that gap just with them throughout their career? Of course, there's a lot of things that you can do on the side, self-teach yourself, and you can, just learn. But do you think that there's a fundamental difference of engineers who were university taught versus those that weren't? Because I know it's a very dynamic conversation in our industry. So I just would love to kind of hear your thoughts.
Totally. I think that's a very interesting question. I personally think that anybody could be one as long as you're a good problem solver. I think it's more about how you think and not with what you're, how you're born, if that makes sense. Like, I obviously think, going to university makes it easier because you have more resources, like people that, professors or TAs that you can go and ask, or just generally the learning environment where you can talk to your friends and build projects together. And in which case you wouldn't have to come up with all the code yourself and you're reading other people's code, right? But I think as long as you're a pretty logical person, you understand how, A affects B affects C, and then until Z and so on and so forth, I think you could be a very good engineer.
Cool. So you're saying basically for someone like myself, I should still have hope. As the funny thing is, Billy, I was one of those kids that went through summer school, and my mom put me in I think it was like a C++ computer summer school camp. And I remember I hated it so much, not because of like the logic and the difficulty, but it was the instructor. I think at that point, he turned me off so much, so badly to coding. I'm like, I have to stay far away from this. But I appreciate you saying it's about how you think. It's about, problem solving. And then if you have a decent foundation in that, perhaps, there's still hope. So I appreciate your kind words.
I think, well, one of my friends, a really good friend, his name is Pepe. I'm sure he wouldn't mind me saying this, but he has been coding since he was like in 4th grade, where he first like hacked into the school system.
Oh my God.
And I won't disclose his full name, but and he got in trouble for it. But because the school had pretty crappy IT, and they left like the password like in a random file somewhere, and he just found it, right? And he was just poking around. So he didn't really, it's just like, I think you would need to find that like inspiration or spark for you that makes it like, oh, like I could use code to do this, right? And for him, it was like, oh, I could bring down a whole school system so no one has lunch for a day. And then he's like, that's really cool for me. And then he went on to learn code, like how to actually do it. But I think you would need to, like everybody does, like that inspiration for you to do something. Or
everyone needs that spark.
Yeah, 100%. Or else it's just tedious, I feel like, because then you're just staring at a computer screen for like hours.
For sure. Yeah, you have to certainly be like really passionate about and just love what you do. But it's interesting that you mentioned that you have always been intrigued about engineering for a long time. And I think for someone that specifically recruits in technology and just interfaces a lot with engineers, I think if you were to ask me, how did people get into engineering? Why do people stay engineering? It's really like one of the two, I think, big things that you touched upon is the fact is infinite scalability, right? So you can build something and everyone in the 4 corners of the planet can theoretically use it. But also, I guess the second one, it really depends what you're building, but also the possibility of just having a significant impact, right? And hopefully doing great things, or maybe a net positive impact for the world, or whatever sector you're building it for. So I think engineers will love to work at a company where you can just combine both, right? You can have that opportunity to build on something truly innovative, disruptive that really impacts people at large scale. And I think that's really cool. And I totally resonate that with what you said. So you go to school, and then it seemed like you've always kind of been into startups or fascinated by startups, and then you kind of dove into the startup scene in New York after school. Is that how it worked?
Yeah, so I've actually just been interning for startups ever since my sophomore year of college. I felt like freshman year, was definitely more of me trying to understand so it was interesting because I studied both business and computer science. And so I was trying to determine, which part of my life I liked more, I liked better. Or I wanted like fully devote myself. And so I guess sophomore year, I went to a demo day, as they would call it, for one of the startup accelerators based in New York City. It's one of the bigger ones. It's called Quake Capital. And I highly recommend, if you're kind of an engineering student, to just go to their demo days, because they kind of fund all the newest things that are going on, right? Back then, there was a company called Node Capital that was like my first internship ever. And I was like a web developer for them. So all I did really was make websites. But I was working with a very talented blockchain engineer at the time who got me more into, actually coding Solidity, actually understanding what smart contracts do at a very deep, very technical level, stuff that they don't really teach you at school because professors don't really know Solidity, right? Most of the time they've got their jobs before Solidity was even invented. And for those of you who kind of don't know, Solidity is the programming language of Ethereum. It's probably the most used smart contract writing language today, because it's used with all kind of Ethereum based blockchains. But that was kind of my first foray. So I was working at a startup pretty much since sophomore year. Like after that, I founded my own startups a couple of times, 2 times to be exact, where I worked at other startups like Fractal Group. That was more like consulting, but it was still pretty new, pretty new as a company. And, I think in general, I just always liked learning on the job a lot better because it gave me this like sense of pressure, that I had to deliver code by a certain time. And that maybe makes me a little bit, masochistic in a way, because I was like, oh, I enjoy that type of pressure, enjoy the time crunch, because it makes me like do my best work, if you will. And so I've always kind of been in a startup environment ever since like sophomore year of college.
That's super interesting. There's a lot to say about people who excel under pressure, or people who are aware that they excel under pressure and they intentionally put themselves in situations where it just brings out the peak performance or just unleashes your creativity, or a combination of both. I think that's really interesting. So it sounds like from listening you talking for the past kind of a minute, like it sounds like you're very entrepreneurial. It's like you kind of dove straight into the startup world. You got intrigued and inspired by demo day and founders there probably, and you tried a couple startups of your own. Have you started other ventures before college, or after college was just like your first foray into taking a bet against yourself?
Yeah. So during college, I had 2 startups that were my own. My first one was called Perry, which was essentially a TaskRabbit clone at the time, but it was just mostly targeting college kids who would want to work with companies that are looking for contractors. That was kind of like an interesting startup. It didn't go so well. But my second startup was called Get Lost. And that was started with one of my dear friends. His name's Adam Kaplan. And he is, an amazing guy. Like he's super, super smart, used to work for airlines. And we essentially made like an online travel agency, but for randomized experiences. So that was pretty fun because we were selling seats, like empty airline seats, like on behalf of airlines, and selling them at like a 40% discount. And the reason we were able to do that is because you didn't know where you were going, like the destination. So for an airline who was trying to get rid of like all the empty seats, right, like leading up to the day of the flight, that's money that they've lost. They were unable to sell that normally, right? Because then that would teach people to, oh, like I should wait till the last minute to buy my like flight ticket, which is bad. They don't want to encourage that behavior, but they would sell it to us because you wouldn't know where you're going. So you would get like 40 to 50% off your flight, and then be able to just like choose like a bucket of destinations like the Caribbean or Europe or South America, right? So you can kind of get into the vicinity of the place, but you have no idea where you're going. That was pretty fun. And we ran that business for around like 9 months. It took me like 6 months to build it. That was fun because I built kind of the entire thing on my own. So that was like very great learning experience because I was like, wow, I needed to think about everything, right? But we launched it for around 3 months and then COVID hit. So that was very, very unfortunate because it was actually going like decently well. We had like a little bit of venture backing, a few angel investors. We had actual customers, but then COVID makes it like pretty much impossible to do that business. But it might have been a good thing in disguise because, now Adam is on doing great things. He has his own ventures and, now I'm here. So never really know where it takes you, but that's kind of like my 3 startup experiences.
That is really cool. First of all, my reaction to that is it's so, especially in tech, if you want to build anything SaaS, software app related, it's so much easier to do that if you're just the engineer yourself, right? Just hearing this, so like for me, I'm more of on like the marketing business person. So if I had the same idea, I'm like, cool, I think that's a great idea. Now I need to go find someone like Billy to help me build it. But like, because you're an engineer yourself, and I think huge props to all engineers out there, you can have an idea and you can almost just crank out an MVP or get to a point where like, hey, like, it's actually functioning. I can present it to people, I can maybe try and test out some users and customers. And it's so much easier and so much faster. And so I think I'm just saying that completely out of jealousy and envy. I think that's awesome. But the second thing is that's a great idea. And I hope maybe perhaps one day you can always do a full circle and back to it. It resonates a lot with me. I know this is a little bit off topic, but I'm the type of person where I always book tickets last minute. And yes. I'm just a horrible planner, specifically when it comes to vacations. And I think there is another similar business out there. I don't remember what they're called. I think it's a vacation club, vacation hunt, but it's similar premise where you pay for upfront, you select what geographic area of the world you want to go to, and they just surprise you with the destination.
I love that. And I
Yeah.
know it's the same model because I
And
wanted to exist. I wanted to exist.
And I gotta tell you, I went to, so we picked Europe and we ended up in Rome, Italy, and we've never been to Italy before.
Yeah.
And it was one of those like amazing, memorable experiences where it was awesome. And I walked away from that trip like, wow, Italy has essentially become like a non-existent country in my mind because all the other countries I want to visit to like now my favorite in Europe because of that. Just being open-minded and just really kind of, taking hold and enjoy spontaneity, right?
Yeah.
At its finest. I think that's really, really cool.
That's really brave. I like what I found out was that most of our customers were above 65 because they were retired.
Interesting.
So they were just straight up just traveling and they get bored. They're like, oh, we always go to X, Y, and Z. And so they would like argue with their wives and then they go, okay, we're gonna go. Like, we're just gonna have this thing take a place.
That's amazing. For any of these companies, did you hire full-time employees? Or I know they said they're doing these in school, so you probably have to be bootstrapped and quite lean and be resourceful, but like how big was the team at its peak?
We had 3 people. It was Adam, who was my friend, and then another guy who was also like, he was part-time. He did UI UX design. So that was mostly what he did, like product prototyping. He actually works for me now again. So it's pretty interesting how things like kind of trickle. But yeah, it was 3 people. We built the whole thing. And I think that also kind of teaches you a lot because you wear so many hats, like you manage so many things. It gives you kind of like a better understanding of like what you're capable of as well. So highly encourage anybody to just start their own business.
Yeah, so kudos for you doing that one, but multiple businesses. And then let's talk about Web3. So how did Web3 come into your life? What was the pivotal moment that really inspired you and obviously just create a whole new trajectory for you in terms of your professional life?
Totally. Web3, where do I even start? So when I first got intrigued was the idea that people can work together without having to trust each other. That in computer science is like a big problem, and it's called like the distributed computing problem. And it's what's really kind of fascinating is that you could write this piece of code, put it into the blockchain, and now nobody can really hack it if you have enough people running this blockchain. And that is pretty and I was like, this is so genius that like I was just like flabbergasted. I was like, I can't believe anybody even thought about this. Like, this is some Einstein level like IQ that like pumped out this type of theory and actually made it work, right? Like they actually made it happen. And I think from that you can do so many things, right? Because like I think humans in general, and maybe this speaks more to my outlook on life, is they're always kind of adversarial relationships, right? But people get together to do amazing things. And so you think about like, how does that happen? And I think like most of the monumental feats that were created were not done by one person. It was done by, hundreds of thousands of people working together to make it happen, right? And I think blockchain is very similar, where at scale, if a lot of people were, working under the same cause, like towards the same thing, and that is kind of governed by a smart contract, you can make sure that everybody's just working towards one goal. And it would make sure that even if you tried to be adversarial, you wouldn't be able to. I had an interesting kind of concept back in college where I wrote like a paper on decentralized nonprofits and how you would disseminate funds using a smart contract instead of, with a lot of nonprofits, there's a lot of fraud, right? I don't want to say anything in particular because, I might get sued, but I think everybody kind of knows that, right? Like if you fund a 501c3, like it's a little bit sus, like it's kind of a vehicle for wealthy people, right? To, make it look philanthropic without, knowing where the money went. It's kind of like a black hole, right? We see a lot of people like misuse that against the better judgment of a lot of people who might be donating. And so I started that idea and I wrote it into like this massive paper for my senior year. I never got around to doing it because I felt like I wasn't the right person to do it at the time. But I think it just kind of speaks to like, how can you use like Web3 as a tool is a way for people to work together. right? And whenever somebody builds a project, either it's like decentralized financing or, NFTs is about community building. You are the core philosophy behind kind of blockchain is like, how do you make it so that people can work together and still trust each other?
And it was that foundation where you're like, wow, something like this is possible, it's available, and now I want to be able to utilize this. And did it just inspire you to then start cranking out your engineering and business solving brain to try to come up with ideas to leverage this technology? And then that's kind of how the spinning wheel started.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, it kind of was just because I was surrounded by people who were like that as well. I think that in general, I think is how people become very good at things. Normally, unless you're like Einstein, where you can just like look at clouds and be like, I know how this works. Like I feel like most people are not like that, right? Where you have to work with other people to share ideas. And everybody around me at that time was either like an engineer who was looking into Web3, or like a business person looking into Web3, or like a banker looking into Web3. And it was super interesting kind of seeing how everybody had a different approach to how this technology would be used. And today, all of them have their own startups in their own like different fields. And me now in advertising, which wasn't a field, we can talk about that later, because that's kind of like a field that I didn't think I would end up in. But it allowed us to share ideas more freely, no judgment. Even if it's like really dumb, we would text each other, and it helped us understand the technology at a much deeper level, right? Because you see it in multiple use cases, at least in your mind. And today, because they've actually built it, you can see it in like hundreds and thousands of use cases as people started to leverage the technology and the invention.
So what are your just thoughts? I know at the time that we're shooting this, it's late 2022. Some people say we're going through a pretty harsh crypto winter here. So like, in your opinion, how did it kind of really affect the community? Did it affect the community's confidence, level of energy at all? Or have a lot of people just been heads down and really utilizing this time to really build that foundation, the strong foundation, so that when things stabilize and we go into another bull run, then hey, it's kind of a gravy, if you will. So what is the overall sentiment of the community that you're seeing in the blockchain Web3 NFT space right now? And then where do you think it'll go into the future?
Yeah, I think generally a lot of people who bought crypto as like a financial vehicle has lost a lot of money, which is very sad. And I think, definitely not good as a whole for people who believe in what the technology can do, right? And like how it can actually help people. And I feel like this always kind of happens. Like in 2016 it happened, right? Like Bitcoin went to I think $14,000 and immediately crashed to like half. And I think we're just seeing the exact same thing, because crypto is not governed by anybody. The price is like actual supply and demand economics, in which case, for example, like with USD or, the euro, there can be slippage because of how it's used, right? And prices can go up and down. But generally, because the most of the supply is given by the government, they can actually control the pricing, right? Like in a way, like if there's too much, they could, buy back, right? And if there's too little, they could boost the economy. And it's like humans operating that in behind the scenes and being like, okay, there's too much money, there's too much money, and they just operate. And that causes like very like much smaller volatility. And I think with crypto, because that doesn't happen and the entire world is your operator, and so anybody at any given time can come and buy crypto that has a price impact to the coin, it's chaotic, right? Is to say the least. And I feel like this space would come back in a way where there's always financial speculation, right? Like that's always going to be there, and that's going to happen again. But I think the idea that a bull run is tied to price, I think, is fundamentally more flawed, just because blockchains can also be used in the back end for a lot of different things, for a lot of different use cases. And I think for businesses that are leveraging blockchain technology, to, get operational efficiencies like across their stacks, will find a better time and, not have to be subjected to the whims of, mass consumer financial speculation. I think as a general consumer, though, like crypto is exciting, especially if you come from a place with, like, how do I even put this? Like the government regulations around money is not as strong, right? Then there's actually like an actual use case. And that is amazing because if the legal standard of your country is bad and doesn't hold up to, has bad operators behind it, then you could use something like Bitcoin or Ethereum, right, as like a safe haven and be able to know that, the internet money at least is governed. There's less volatility with internet money than your own country's money, right? That's the kind of like calculus that you're doing. And that use case as a financial tool makes sense to me. But if you're just purely buying Bitcoin or Ethereum for, price go up, I think that's like a losing game in the long run. Um, and I don't know, I just wouldn't recommend doing that. Not a financial, like an account wealth manager for you, but I just feel that in the long run would be detrimental as a whole.
Especially for those that are just emotional, uneducated, they just got in when they saw everyone else getting in, or based on irrational FOMO. I love how you said that, the price of the Bitcoin does not equal the industry, right? It's completely two different things. And just because we're in a winter does not mean the entire industry is dead. All projects are dead. For those, obviously, especially jumping in for the financial benefits, and if their timing was significantly off, they're obviously hurting right now. But for those that really believe in the power of technology, its longevity of it, and the impact that it can have, and not just one sector, but a lot of different multi sectors, I think it's still a really exciting time, and an exciting place to be. Almost to be there. Technically, it's still the early ages of Web3 in its infancy, and so it's, for me, it's really exciting and wild to talk to a lot of the founders who have now like Web3 powered, they're building some sort of Web3 powered app or technology in different fields, and it's just accelerating at a faster pace. So I'm personally excited to see where this will kind of go into the future, but it's really helpful to get your insight. So let's talk about Insomnia Labs. So obviously, you come into Web3, you embraced it, you believe in the power of it. Would you be able to share with the audience, what do you guys do again, and how big is your team, if people are curious?
Totally. So my team is around 15 people, and we have kind of a network of contractors that we work with. We actually started off in the beginning of 2021, and we essentially had this thesis that, especially with NFTs, and for those of you who don't know, it's like non-fungible tokens, that it would be a way to do digital asset management kind of for large brands or artists. We didn't really think that at that time that people would price speculate so hard on it. I think we kind of just thought about it as like a inventory management system, and think that, oh, brands might use it to, make it like a loyalty program or like a reward program, right? And build it on the backs of, NFTs. So with that thesis, we went to a lot of different brands and we started just like pitching them ideas. Most of which we were kind of thinking more on like marketing campaigns. So one of our kind of like more successful use cases was Under Armour, and we worked with Steph Curry to drop a shoe called the Genesis Curry Flows. And those shoes were usable across different gaming platforms because of NFT is the underpinning technology. And so when we dropped the shoe, it was interesting because Under Armour was kind of going through a little bit of a supply chain issue, right, at the time. And so we, by selling digital shoes that were, wearable by users, it kind of like helped ease that pain with like the supply chain issue. So we found there was good timing, the right business use case, and it actually went really well. So it raised like $1 million for charity. There was around like $20 million in like aftermarket trading activity. And, we were happy with how it went because I think a lot of people, saw the work and was like, started to understand like, oh, organizations can use it kind of as like as a marketing tool, right? Like as a way for you to get attention to your products. right? For us, it was the shoe, but for other brands, it could be one of many different things that they could want to be doing today. And fast forward to today, you'll see a lot of brands starting to come up with their own NFTs. They might not even call it NFTs, right? Like Reddit recently did the avatar collections, I think like 80,000 of them. And I think 3 million people made a wallet just so they could do it, right? But the thing there was that they didn't even say it was an NFT. So you didn't even know that you were working with a blockchain, right? And everything that is almost kind of like the exact use case that we're building out for brands today, which is it's a backend system, right? You don't need to price speculate on that. And it actually just, more technically gives you a lot of operational efficiency. So it's easier to manage all of your collectibles, easier to manage your reward system if it's all in one place, easier for your teams to work on it like together at one time because it's all in one place, right? And the one place being the blockchain. And so if we go back and we talk about why Web3 is good for organizations, we say it's because internally all of your teams can work together and have that be governed by the code, right? And so I think essentially that's what we've been doing with a lot of different companies and helping them set up that infrastructure. And if you kind of like think about what are the public projects that do it, I think Reddit is the best one, right? So they started a reward program basically on Reddit for like millions of people to collect digital rewards.
So you approach companies and brands. Are a lot of the companies brands that you're approaching already kind of aware of Web3 and NFTs, or are you doing a lot of the educating yourself and be like, hey, we think you're a great brand with a fantastic reach, global recognition, and then you can use our technology infrastructure to then leverage or launch a certain number of other exciting campaigns to further create relationships with the community. Is that kind of how like the general like hypothesis and the premise works?
Yeah, pretty close and pretty darn close. Like I think companies in general try to have very different levels of understanding. Like we have a client who's just like a genius and like they already know they just want a team that can do it, right? So they would kind of give us a blueprint and be like, this is kind of how I want it, like translate this into actual actual work, and then we can help them do that. But there are others that want a little bit more holistic where they go, well, we want to target really to Web3 specific users, right? And because we've kind of been in the space, we have that understanding a lot better. And so we become more like strategic advisory instead, right? So our services kind of broaden depending on the agency we work with or the company we work with. And the companies are generally very large. So think like L'Oreal and like Under Armour, and people like or brands like that. We're actually, not to kind of show our own product, but we made a new product that actually makes it easier for anybody to do it, like smaller to medium-sized organizations, celebrity teams, developers that are trying to do it. And so we're kind of going towards that direction where we understand that a lot of people are going to be interested in how to make NFTs, how to use it for your business, even if you don't call it an NFT, for mass market purposes, right? For just doing marketing for your own. But as of what we've done today, like we're not there yet. Most of the time, we still work as an agency currently, and we help brands think through like Web3, all the implications from like legal to finance to tech to what do you have right now, like as your business, and how can we use Web3 to help you?
How difficult is it for you guys to get clients? Especially, it sounds like the companies are going after these old, big companies. Some of them dinosaurs have been around for a long time, and many would consider perhaps old school, right? So like have you experienced a lot of pushback, a lot of just you have to educate them, or are most people just genuinely intrigued?
I think most people are intrigued, and we try to meet them halfway. Because like they could be intrigued, but be like, I don't want to spend money on this, right? But some of them could be intrigued and be like, we want to do a pilot program. If the pilot program is successful, they will fund it, right? So it's kind of like that, where I think especially we mostly think about NFT from an advertising, from a content, from a media standpoint, and how it engages with users, make that one-on-one relationship. We are educating them, I would say like a good 50% of the time, But another 50% of the time is just helping them navigate within their own ecosystems, right? Because like, in a large company, there's so many departments and there's so many people that you would need to get buy-in from. So how do you get buy-in from your legal team? How do you get buy-in from your accounting team? How do you get buy-in from your media, social media, marketing teams, right? So we kind of help advise. They would be like, oh, we need this from legal, and we'll be like, you might be able to do this, right? And they said, okay, that would work. We'll be like, this doesn't work, and then we go back to it again. And then it kind of just, how do we help them get the product out in any way?
How many clients or projects have you done since inception?
So let me see, three, four, and then there's two coming out by the end of the year.
Wow, that's awesome. And what's like the typical life cycle of a project? Is it typically like 6 months type of thing?
Yeah, I think normally pitching could just take forever. Like pitching could take anywhere between like a month
Oh my
if they're like
goodness.
really fast to like 6 months, which is like I hate personally, but sometimes you just have to do it.
So as the owner of like a recruiting business that functions very similar to yours, like a very consulting, high level strategy agency, I totally empathize generating businesses, pitching the clients. And in an ideal scenario, we want that cycle to be as short and small as possible. But it seems like with you guys, it's an extra level of complexity because something like an NFT, you can't just talk and get a buy-in from one person. It has to be multi-divisional. And so I empathize with that, and I hope that you guys continue to do well. Your team has about 15 people. Are all those full time?
15 is full time.
Wow, that's incredible.
But I would say like there's a lot more that is just maybe pulled on a needs basis. Like we contract out a decent amount for creative work, so it's more like coming up with like media assets, or because sometimes like we would be tasked to make a full-blown commercial, right, that explains how our NFTs work, and we have a creative team in-house who can do that, but they can't shoot a whole commercial on their own. They're more like creative directors, and they would need to pull in like a whole like 40 people team to actually like make that happen, right? So we can also manage that in-house. Mostly the brands would never really have to pay anybody else to make it. Like we could just make it. But then we on the back end is then, taking on the responsibility to find the right people to do the job.
I got to say, building a team to 10, 15 in this market in New York City, in the middle of a recession, post pandemic, is highly respectable. And so huge kudos to you and the team. Just what has been your favorite channel when it comes to just finding great people to join your team? Are you guys utilizing your own networks? Perhaps there are a bunch of them are friends, affiliates, referrals.
I think referrals is huge. I think, especially with engineers, like usually good engineers know other good engineers. When I was working at WeWork, they did that a lot. And I found that was pretty effective, but you can't rely solely on that. So we do have kind of an HR head who does a lot of the sourcing himself, like using kind of LinkedIn or AngelList is a pretty good one for us. There are kind of Web3 specific like HR channels that we tap sometimes. But those, we usually have to sort through pretty heavily because some of the people are, not exactly compliant, like can't work with people in the US, right? So we have to like weed those people out. But for the most part, I think we were able to handle it in-house because we don't have to grow exponentially, right? If we, let's say, did our Series A or B, then different story because we're then hiring like 40 people to 100 people. But, we're kind of a seed round company. We did raise a seed. We closed like 2.7 million as of last month. And we're kind of using that to grow a lot of our engineering teams right now, and looking to kind of pilot that product that we're talking about. And we've been building that thing for a while. We've been building that thing for like 7 months, but now we're kind of getting close to, launch. Like there's even more things that we didn't even think about that we're kind of just like patching the fires with, I would say. So I think it all depends. Like a lot of times we get a lot of inbound from these like large enterprises all of a sudden, and we would have to scale our teams. In general, like we always have a network of people who are available. I think that's part of like what we like to be doing is, just knowing a lot of people, right? Like knowing a lot of engineers. Everybody, I think, on my team kind of knows like another 50 people. that they would be tapping. And so that's how I think we've been able to keep it smaller than most companies that are in our space. Like you see a lot of company raising like $100 million, and then they would just like blow through that by hiring 200 people. And then you're like, I don't know if that's like, for us, it doesn't really work that way. Like we kind of just think, okay, we have 15 people, but each of us can reach like 50 people, which means, if we need to, then we bring in the right people. And that has worked pretty well for us. So that's a big kudos to my team. So shout out to them.
Yeah, it's great that you guys are being intentional. You guys are growing cautiously, but in a very smart, strategic way, especially in a niche like Web3, where it's not massive. It is growing very, very quickly. I'm talking specifically about talent, right? So it's really cool to see that you and your team are being quite resourceful and very successful at that. Just being able to constantly maintain relationships or bring them in at the right time to continue to grow your team. What is there anything about your team, company by Insomnia Labs, that you would say is very unique in terms of like the internal culture? What do you guys do something different? Or if is there a reason why someone should be excited, for example, to work at Insomnia Labs?
Yeah, I think people in general, and it's kind of in our name, Insomnia, is like we work all the time. So from like a culture standpoint, is really the type of people we look for, which is like people who just enjoy the work. But that being said, like we do make sure that there are days where people just can't bother you, right? Because then if you're just like working all the time, you go crazy. For me, like that's Saturday. And I tell like everybody that if you talk to me on Saturday, it better be like our entire code base is being hacked. like, or else like you just cannot contact me. And I encourage a lot of people to do that as well, because you really need your own days. I love like my team and their ability to just crank, but I think sometimes it's like finding that balance for you. I don't know, like because we're a startup, we look for people with kind of the startup mentality. So like people were probably a little bit more ambitious, like people who try to bite off more they can chew. Like if you find yourself that doing that a lot, then maybe you are a good fit. We help you regulate that, so we give you enough for you to chew instead of too much. And I think in general, people who have their own ideas, I think is always the key. I like to tell people that one of the things that I resonate a lot with is like the fact that ideas can really come at any time, anywhere. Like I could be in the shower, I could be swimming, I could be, playing with my dog. But anytime, anywhere, ideas can come. And we find people who really seize the day when they do have an idea, right? When it hits them, they go into like overdrive and they go, I can't sleep until I like at least think about this or talk to someone about it and like try to put something together right now. And we want that to continue to be our DNA, like going forward, because it is how you do the best work, and it is how people find themselves in situations that they would never normally find themselves in. I'm sure you would probably agree as well. I'm sure there's so many things as like a founder that you would probably think about all the time. So yeah, I think that's generally, I think just people who are excited about what they do, people who are excited about their own ideas.
Couple more questions. I know we're running out of time, but like, what would you say is the future of Insomnia Labs? Is it basically reiterate, just cranking and iterating and evolving what you're currently doing with bigger and bigger projects, bigger and bigger clients? Anything in particular that you're really excited about for the future?
Absolutely. So our product, we have a whole suite of products coming out that I think is going to be really interesting. I think we've built enough enterprise grade software that we can now spin them out and then for everybody to use. And we're excited to do that. So, at the core, we're a tech company. At the core, even though we do advisory and strategy for companies, we enjoy building products. Like that's kind of the most fun because as I said, it reaches the most people and has the most impact. So yeah, I think you're going to see probably a lot of products come out from our side in the next year, especially. So I'm looking forward to that.
Perfect. And then for someone that started as an engineer, who's now a founder of a fast growing company, Billy, I know before you told me that you were just trying to figure out whether the business side resonated with you or the engineering side resonated with you. What would you say resonates with you now? I
would definitely still say the tech. I don't think it really gets away from that because the tech is reality. I think business is, and I kind of love the business games we play sometimes, like when you're talking about deals and partnerships. But if you approach it more methodically, I don't know, it's more real, I think more genuine, more authentic, and less like people would want to work with you more. I like that part of approaching business as well. So I definitely think like foundationally, I've always been an engineer. I don't think I would change from that. But even solving business problems, like I do generally approach it like an engineer, which my partner sometimes gets mad at me for. But I do think the tech side speaks to me.
Last question. For people who are listening and they would love to follow in your footsteps one day, whether it's starting one company or multiple companies, having a successful career, what is one advice that you'd like to share to listeners?
Just be curious. Honestly, I think most of the times ideas die because we don't put it together. And it is much smarter, in my opinion, to just fail fast, fail early, than to not having realized any of your idea potential at all. And that might be easier to say than done, especially because most of the things that I like to do, I can build on in my hands. But I think for most people, there is that one thing that you're extremely good at, right? Or there's that one thing that you're extremely passionate about, and building around those things and the ideas that you have around those things, they can't lose. They just can't. Like, even if it doesn't work because there's no product market fit, even people are telling you that it's like dumb, but how would you know until you've actually done it? Like, how would you know? And that at least keeps me awake if I don't do it. And I go, okay, well, I need to at least try. I'm sure there's a lot of people who would resonate with that, which is you don't know until you've tried. And you just got to do it.
You just have to go for it.
Just go.
Before I let you go, Billy, if people really want to reach out to you, maybe apply one day, they want to just follow the progress of you and Insomnia Labs, where can they reach out to you? Where can they find you?
They can find me on our website, which is insomnialabs.io. And we have a contact form there. But if you want my email, it's also just billy@insomnialabs.io. So very easy to find me.
Billy, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for sharing more insight about your life, the impressive companies that you've built, and now the great things you guys are doing in Insomnia. I will personally be following you guys. I'm a huge fan of Web3, NFT, and all the power of that technology and the impact it has on the world. But I will not take up that much more time. I know you have a lot of other exciting projects, team, and clients that you have to go and deal with. So I appreciate it again. Wish you and your team nothing but tremendous success, and looking forward to keep in touch with you.
Thank you so much, Preston. Have a great one.
You too.